Okay, we've got a big program today, so we'll just go ahead and get started. I'll keep letting people in as they join. Hi, everyone. I am Darlene Johnson. I'm the Director of External Relations at the Center for Career Design and Development at Hofstra University. I have worked closely with a lot of you that are here participating in our event. For those of you that don't know me, I am the person who works most closely with our employer partners. So I am here to help employers with their recruiting needs, getting to know our students and engaging with them. So you will see I did list our fall career fairs. You are all connected with us through Handshake. That's how you found out about this event. So these are our fall fairs. They are listed on Handshake right now. They are all virtual. We're keeping the virtual fairs in the fall. If you want to come on campus, we have some other ways that you can do that. But registration is currently open on Handshake. That is, of course, where you will post all of your open jobs, internships for students as well. That is where we refer our students and alumni for job and internship postings. So this is all on Handshake. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So again, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today for this really, really important event. And we are so thrilled to have the panel with us that we do have. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then we will have time at the end to address those questions. We would love to be able to do this again in the future with some other sort of professional development topic. So if there are any topics that you would like us to do in this type of a format, please email me. All of you have been bombarded by emails from me. So you have my contact information, but please let me know if you have any ideas. I would now like to turn it over to my very special colleague, Julie Indra. Julie is the director of our Student Access Services office here at Hofstra, and she's going to moderate our panel. So take it away, Julie.
Thank you so much, Darlene. Everybody, I'm so thrilled to see such a great turnout for this event. As Darlene said, I run the Access Services office here at Hofstra, and we have a large contingency. We're currently serving about 850 students in some capacity at Hofstra. Just to give you a little bit of background, I have been in education for 30 years. I'm also an adult living with spina bifida. And when people talk to me about what I do for a living, I always tell them that one of the reasons why I do what I do is that some years ago, I saw some statistics that said that, you know, and at the time it was nearly 30 years, now it's over 30 years since the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, 70 to 75% of people like me in the country don't have a job. And that's never been acceptable to me. And I also found out that if you are a person with a disability, if you hold at least a bachelor's degree, your chances of being gainfully employed when you're 26 are tripled. And so I said, I know what I want to do for a living, right? I want to facilitate higher education access for individuals with disabilities so I can increase the opportunities that they're going to have to pursue their American dream, which is what brings me here to Hofstra, and what brings me to be collaborating with Darlene and her colleagues in her area on so many projects like this one, because I think it's not just my responsibility to make sure that students are getting the accommodations that they need to achieve academic success, but it's also my responsibility to help them take the next step after college to enter the workforce or graduate studies or whatever that might be. So what I want to do before we start getting into the meat and to the questions that we've prepared for the panelists is have the panelists just give a brief introduction themselves to the audience so that you know who's talking to you. And we're just going to go in order of who's appearing on my screen. So I'm going to start with Dan Dotter. Dan, if you would just introduce yourself.
Sorry, I was on mute, per usual. Hi, Julie. Thanks for that introduction. My name is Dan Dotter. I'm with Getting Hired. I'm the new partnership lead. We are an organization dedicated to helping employers better attract, hire, and ultimately retain individuals as well as veterans with disabilities. Super excited to be here. And Julie, thanks for going into detail about how you support students at Hofstra University. They're obviously so lucky to have you. As someone personally who has leveraged the student accommodation centers at where I went to school for my developmental disabilities, and saw a pretty steep drop off from the support that I was able to get at school to where I had it in the professional world. That's a personal area for me. So your students are very lucky to have you as well. And I'm privileged to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Lucy, you're next.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm an account rep at Amazon. I'm also a little person, and I like to describe my job as I get to talk all day on the phone and connect with new sellers. So it's great to have an opportunity to have a job to talk to people a lot.
Thanks so much. And Becky, you're next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Kakula, and I also identify as a little person, super passionate about this space. I am not an alum of Hofstra, but I went to Providence College, and I'm super passionate about making sure there's a dialogue between disability services centers and the career centers, so there are opportunities for more people with disabilities when it comes to looking for jobs.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Clinton.
How is everyone? Thanks for joining. Julie, very appreciative to be asked to be on this panel. I am an alumni of Hofstra University. I love the school. The reason why I'm on this panel is because the office was so great to me during my undergraduate years that it is my pleasure to be here. I work at Altice USA Telecommunications and Corporate Finance, and I moonlight for them as the affinity group leader for team access for employees and customers with disabilities, helping them build programs to make them a better company for both of those groups. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Clinton. And Brian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Stromer. I am a product marketing manager at Microsoft, and I co-lead our disability and marketing group. I graduated only 4 years ago, and I went to Vanderbilt, so I think very much relatable to where I think a lot of you are coming from right now. And I did the Next Gen leadership program at Disability, in which I think Becky will talk a little bit about. But super excited to be here. And I have cerebral palsy. I like to say that means that I always kind of look like I'm a little bit off balance, or that every hour is my happy hour is another way I explain it.
That's great. That's fantastic. So we have a lot to cover. We're going to try to cover as many topics and subjects as we possibly can in the time that we have with you. So I'm going to get right into it and start with the very basics and ask the panel who would like to start us off with a discussion of what exactly is the Americans with Disabilities Act? Who wants to start us off? Nobody?
I'll go.
Okay, Becky, fantastic. Thank you.
So the Americans with Disabilities Act was a civil rights legislation that was passed in 1990. So we're going into our 31st year of celebrating the Americans with Disabilities Act. We often talk about how it was building the foundation for the floor, and it's not the ceiling. So even though it is an act that protects the rights of people with disabilities, there's still a long way to go. And there are different pillars of the act, but the one that we're talking about most specifically today is in the workplace. So really making sure that people with disabilities have the reasonable accommodations that they need in the workplace in order to be successful. And disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act is defined as a physical or mental impairment that limits one or more of life's major activities. You won't necessarily see in the act every single disability spelled out, because it really is who identifies under that definition. And in fact, 75% of disabilities are non-visible, non-apparent. So there are some of us on this panel today who have physical disabilities that you can see. And there are a whole bunch of people in the world who do not have a visible disability. So really it's all different types of disabilities related to that physical or mental impairment in that description. But it really built the foundation, and we just are continuing to push the work forward to bring more awareness to this community and the potential that there is with the 1 billion people worldwide who have a disability. Hopefully that helps.
That's great. That's great. Clint, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I love how you put it, Becky. It's where the conversation starts for inclusion with people with disabilities, but it's not where it ends. And it is broad, but it is focused. And as I go through discussions with my company, I like to talk about the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law is not always needing to hone in on the fine print of the ADA, but realizing that the ADA has created the conversation and it's created that pathway for people with disabilities and inclusion, and we should really attend to it by the spirit of the law. What's the right thing to do? How do we make it equitable for our employees with disabilities to do everything that every other employee can do within the confines of the firm?
I think that's such an important nuance, right? Is that it's the beginning of the conversation. For instance, one of the things that Becky said was the regulations say that employers have to provide what's called reasonable accommodations, but who gets to define what reasonable means, right? Every employer around the country has conversations about what reasonable means to them in the context of their organization, their work, and their ability to make accommodations, right? So it's definitely not, there are very clear regulations, but very often people find themselves in this gray space of, the conversation 30 years ago, the conversation was, what do we have to do, right? What does the law require that we do? And recently, more of the conversation, which I'm very happy about, is why? Why should we do that? What are the advantages and benefits of hiring a diverse workforce, right? And what are the advantages and benefits of being a disability-friendly environment for your employees, as well as your constituents and customers, right? So I think that's a really important evolution that, the conversation continues. One of the things that a lot of people ask, and I want to ask the panelists who feel compelled to comment on this, the regulations within the Americans with Disabilities Act address employees, but what are the responsibilities of employers to accommodate prospective employees, applicants? What does it mean to be open and welcoming and accommodating and accessible to applicants? Anybody want to take a whack at that one? Lucy.
I'll jump in. So because I'm working the sales, this is just from my personal experience, but one thing that I've been really impressed with is this new program initiative where making the application itself accessible in many dimensions. So not only providing space that asks if the applicant would like accommodations and how to specify, but making sure that, and I apologize, I don't have the exact term of it, that the website itself is accessible for people who have low visibility or might require accommodations just to get to that site. So I would say one benefit has definitely been employers who think about how to promote themselves to everyone and how sometimes you have to do things that other people aren't doing to make sure your text is visible and make sure there's a spot that people can request accommodation that's respectful and that they feel that their privacy isn't being invaded, but also that it will be followed up with. So I would say applications and then follow up and just making sure to make it a very safe and respectful place.
Super, fantastic. The analogy that I always use when I'm talking to people about that, what Lucy, is that in my very first job in higher education, I went to work for a small private college that was not physically accessible at all. And when I started talking to them about, there are things you need to do to make this campus more accessible, the initial response that I got was, well, we don't have any students with physical disabilities, so we don't need to do that because there's no one for us to accommodate. And I brought the Board of Trustees members that were there for a Board of Trustees meeting over to the admissions office. And the admissions office had a flight of stairs in the front of the building. And I said, this is why you don't have any students with disabilities, because no one's they're going to come here to visit, to tour, and as soon as they pull up to the admissions building, they're going to turn around and leave. Right? So the entryway into your firm or organization or company has to be open to everyone in order for this to work, right? So that's a fantastic place for us to begin. One of the questions that has been coming up, especially in the last few years, more and more often, Becky did make reference to the fact that, most people with disabilities in this country have disabilities that we would refer to as non-apparent, disabilities that you would not necessarily notice upon meeting someone. So one of the things that has been a big conversation lately in the country is people who are considered neurodiverse, right? Students or employees on the autism spectrum with ADHD, learning disabilities. Who would like to talk about what are some of the reasons why employers should really give serious consideration to looking at their company's ability to hire a neurodiverse population? Who wants to try that? Dan.
I'll take a stab at that one. This is personal to me as well. One of my very best friends growing up next door to me is on the autism spectrum. I myself have ADHD among some other learning disabilities. So we were really actually quite a good duo, because I was kind of the talker and he was the thinker. We really supplemented each other very well. But individuals who are neurodiverse offer exceptional ability just like anyone else. Individuals on the autism spectrum have roughly 85% unemployment despite having exceptional abilities. These are people that have exceptional ability for pattern recognition, memory and mathematics. There is an incredible place for them within our organizations. So to address the fact that this is a talent pool that is so underutilized, really is it's worthwhile. I know of an organization that for a basic accommodation is providing headphones as a part of these programs. So there's a lot of ways to get involved in these types of programs. There's a lot of groups that are dedicated to supporting neurodiverse individuals. So really all you have to do is start the dialogue and get the discussion going, and I think you'd be surprised. So
anybody else on the panel want to add to what Dan has had to say?
Yeah, I can add to what Microsoft does, because we have a huge investment in this area. I will say it's not that program isn't my focus, but I'm happy to speak to it. So at Microsoft, we've recognized that the traditional interviewing process doesn't always serve the needs of those with neurodiversity. So you think about something like a traditional interview or phone screen, where it's very much kind of like around relatability. It's a lot of social interaction. So what we've really said is, hey, we need to hire this population because this population is using our products as our customers, and we need to be representative of that. How can we get more folks with neurodiversity in the door? So we kind of came up with this, and there's a lot of big companies that do this too. It's right now actually called the Autism Hiring Program, and I put a link to it in the chat, but we're actually changing it to the Neurodiversity Hiring Program just to open up the net a little bit more. But it's really thinking about, what are the components of the interview process where not just are we making them accessible, but are we actually setting up the candidates to be successful? And I think that's a big differentiator that we're doing, is thinking about how can we set this process up so we still get really high caliber talent, but that we are not kind of focusing on one's weaknesses or challenges, but more the strengths that they bring.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that information. Clint, I would like to ask you a question. If you would take just a couple minutes to talk to us about some of the things that Altice is doing in order to create a more inclusive environment for employees, and what measures your company is taking in order to advance in that area.
Yeah, certainly. Somewhere around 2.5, 3 years ago, our CEO had a town hall and addressed the entire company, specifically on the rollout of a diversity and inclusion program. And that was groundbreaking for a formerly mom and pop kind of niche cable company that operated very differently, and now was taken over by a much larger firm. And it was groundbreaking in the fact that it was including me. I got up out of my chair, went downstairs to where the presentation was being made, and I introduced myself personally to the CEO after the meeting, and I said, I am your person to run an accessibility group if you would let me. And from that day on, I have been the leader of Altice Access, and I have been able to sit in boardrooms, get right to the COO on any issues, any program rollouts that I've wanted to do to help the everyday work experience for our employees with disabilities. And I've been able to create focus groups with our product and marketing, HR and TA, and any other touch point departments, retail store, a big one, customer service, customer experience. Talk to those folks on a yearly basis, sometimes a quarterly, to make sure that they're keeping accessibility and disability on their priority list every year for whatever they're rolling out. So what my company has done is they've included me in the conversation, and they've emboldened me to take on the challenge of being the go-to person. It's worked out. So far, so good. I think the next level would be for us to raise our metrics game a little bit, to really find out how we're impacting the promotion, the hiring of people with disabilities. Sometimes, for whatever reason, employees just don't feel comfortable with identifying as somebody with a disability, because for so many years, that has been seen as a liability in their estimation. But I'm trying to do a job of screaming from the watchtowers that your disability is not a liability, and the company is here to help you. Now, it becomes a problem when that bubbles up, and then it just comes out from an employee, and the employee will then look not like they want to look. So we want to try to head that off before an issue becomes a real problem for an employee. I think that's been a major breakthrough for us. And what we could always do more, but I'm proud of what we've done. And so I wake up every day and I want to make Altice better for people with disabilities. And I just hope that I try to inspire that in my colleagues who don't have disabilities. And I'm sort of rallying the troops for the firm, and it's been really rewarding, and I've seen an impact. Great.
Lucy, what are some of the things that are going on at Amazon along this vein?
Yeah. First off, like, awesome, Clint. There's definitely a lot of programs. I'm involved with the People with Disabilities Affinity Group, but also the Belong at Diversity and Inclusion Group. So it's been interesting being part of those two groups. I would say we have some great leaders who have been at Amazon longer than I have, who are to Clinton's point, this idea of making it, spreading awareness and education so that people are more informed, because I think one of the biggest things is just familiarity with the different types of disabilities, and also what does that mean, or what can we do to help each other? So I'd say definitely having, support group with resources, as Clinton said, like access to leaders who can help with providing additional resources and getting the word out to the internal employees, but also that company's customers. So making sure that Amazon is both, in my opinion, like a place that's really great to work as an employee, and then also for externally for our customers, that people feel welcome.
Super, super. I think one of the things that Clint mentioned is really important for us to talk about for a moment, and that is part of the problem is that for centuries, disability has been a bad thing, right? As my friend who's no longer with us, Stella Young, used to say, people think of disability as a bad thing, capital B, capital T. And when I talk about disability, I talk about we have to change the mindset and help people to understand that disability is a particular characteristic that exists in human beings on a wide range. Some people can see particularly well, and some people have average vision, and some people can't see particularly well, right? And the same thing goes for walking and talking and all of the human characteristics that are out there. It's just a range of uniqueness amongst all of us. And I think what I try to help people understand is disability is a socially constructed concept. I am a person with a disability because the people in my community deem me as such, because in a world that is not built for someone who has mobility challenges, I am inherently disadvantaged in my environment. So the problem is not me. The problem is the combination of me interacting with an environment that is not friendly and inviting to me, right? So we have to start thinking of our workplace in that way, right? If I happen to have been born into a society where stairs had never been invented, and people got, and everything was a single floor, and people got from point A to point B on those moving sidewalks like they have in large airports, I would not be considered a person with a disability, because I would not be inherently disadvantaged over everybody else, right? And so we have to start thinking about how to create a different dynamic between employees and the work environment to make it a better match. And that's the mindset that we have to get to, right? That's the goal. And so I think that's a really, really important point that you made. So for all of the employers that are out there in the audience, I think thing number one, if you're interested in helping your organization make some headway in this area, is the first thing you want to do is find your Clints and find your Lucys and give them some power and some resources and ask them what you should do.
Hey, Julie, one of the things that I tried to talk to my HR group about is you want to hire for disability. First things first, know what you're looking for in the talent pool. Understand what kind of characteristics you're looking for in the person that you want to hire for a specific job. And you very well might just come across a person with a disability that has every one of those characteristics that you're looking for. Start there. Right? Because we could get sidetracked with what somebody looks like, or whether or not somebody has a disability. And most of the time, you find out that people don't even know what they're looking for in the position. And so let's get back to ground zero here and find out what we're looking for, what talents. Does Clint meet those talents? Does Becky, does Lucy, does Brian or Dan, do they have those talents? Okay, yes, that's a check mark. Good, let's go. Now we go to the next step. And I think, if we take it kind of slowly like that, I think that's a way to keep ourselves honest as what are we trying to hire for? And then you start understanding that, wow, we have a whole neurodiverse community that could absolutely knock this project out of the park. What are we doing? Let's go. Let's do this. So when we start thinking about all the different types of disabilities that have their strengths and where those strengths lie and how those strengths meet the projects and the programs within that department, and you start realizing that you could have a whole team of X-Men on your in your company doing amazing things.
So
just quickly to add to that, just the importance of just strengthening the word disability and not dancing around it. A lot of companies tend to use the word ability or different ability or diverse ability. But if we all just band together and strengthen the word, I think it'll cause less confusion because people will know, like, this is the community we want to include, and it's okay to use this terminology. Let's get to the work, because people often get caught up on what terminology to use and it prevents them from doing the work.
And actually, Becky, that's a perfect segue to the next question. And I was going to start with you, as a matter of fact. How can we help employers navigate the sometimes uncomfortable situation of being in an interview situation with someone and knowing that they can't and aren't supposed to directly address disability related issues? How can we help employers handle that conversation in appropriate ways?
Yes, I think it's really important to start, especially in the world that we're in now. People have been a little better at checking in, like, how are you? Let's talk about your day before we dive into these intense questions. I think it's really important to have those introductory touch points that don't seem as intimidating. And as you kind of get to know a person, they would start to feel a little bit more comfortable disclosing what they may need to feel successful. And it's even important before the candidate shows up, make it known that you're willing to make an accommodation for the interview process. And that allows them to come out and tell you what accommodation they may need. But I would say, don't try to alter the interview process just because you think that's what you need to do. And I'm also going to put in a resource, the style guide. It's from the National Center for Disability Journalism at Arizona State University. If you educate yourself on the terminology and the different types of disabilities, you can go into that interview a little bit more aware, and you may start hearing things that sound familiar based on what accommodations someone may ask for or need. But what we really want to do is hope that the candidate with the disability who's applying for the job and qualified to interview can actually do everything that's described in the job description. And you also, as an employer, want to be fair to make sure, like I always use the example, if it says must lift a 50-pound box, really make sure that's a necessary piece of the job description, or is it once in a great while someone else in the office could do it? So really try to look at those potential barriers in the job description. But I would say, for the most part, we don't want things to go differently. We just want to be set up for success, and we don't want it to be socially awkward on either end during that process.
That was a great summary. I once had a conversation with a student a couple of years ago. She was a young lady who was about to graduate from Hofstra, and she was a power chair user. And we were talking, and I said, now, Tori, you know, I know you're doing interviews. How are you handling that? What are you saying? And she said, here's what I do. I go into the interview and I'm sitting in my power chair across from the person who's interviewing me. And when I see that face that they're starting to contemplate what to say next, I simply say, I'll bet you're wondering how I'm going to get around in the work environment. Let me tell you. Right? So one of the things that we are doing is we are teaching our students to take the reins and open up that dialogue with employers who may not be sure how to start that conversation. So that's perfect. Dan, is there anything you can add to what Becky said in terms of helping employers navigate what can sometimes be a sticky situation?
Yeah, and Julie, I think you made a good point. You know, for those who are able to and brave enough to basically address things head on like that's phenomenal. I think we could promote that. That's great. But there always will be people that are just, you're in the interview process. It's a delicate process for both sides. You want the job. gonna do things to get the job as much as you can. The bottom line that I see with employers, and this is kind of sometimes an uncomfortable conversation that I have, is the barriers to employment for people with disabilities. It's not intrinsic to people with disabilities. It's based in a fear within the organization and within the human resource professionals at that organization. So when you talk about it, you got to talk about it from the perspective of awareness, education. Becky, when you sent that style guide, talking about just understanding things like preferred versus non-preferred language, giving those tools to a recruiter who may not be accustomed to screening individuals with disabilities or individuals that are not like them. Recruiters, in my experience, are often young in their career, or there are large teams with these employers and high turnover rate. You get some individuals that don't have the experiences to work through these situations as well as perhaps some of us would. So having these tools in place for disability etiquette, preferred language, things of that nature can really help build the confidence necessary to screen candidates that may use a wheelchair, may not look like them. And this is true with all diversity categories, but especially that with disability. This is an organizational and an HR problem. This is not a disability problem. And that's really all I have to say about this.
Thank you so much. That was terrific. So I want to be mindful of our time, and I know that we want to leave some time at the end to answer questions. So what I want to do now is go around and ask every one of the panelists to comment on my next question, which is, what do you see in the future for workplace accommodations, especially in the context of the year that many of us have just experienced due to the pandemic? What do you see as the future of what's going to become typical accommodations for people in the workplace? Who wants to start off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that more people with disabilities are working. I hope that as far as accommodations are concerned, if the employee is better suited at working from home, that there are more opportunities and that the technology that they need in order to do their job is provided by their employer. I hope that individuals with disabilities who can and are willing to go into a physical office are allowed to really have that social interaction and that teamwork, that person-to-person, face-to-face interaction that every human being needs from a mental health standpoint to get going. And that is really, really important right now. We all need it. But for people with disabilities, have to get out of the house. Just absolutely have to and need that social interaction. So I hope that is part of the next year or two. And my third hope is that companies are more accommodative with allowing employees to work from home when there is a disability related issue that hinders them from getting around. And I experience that very often. I have very, very bad joint pain, and I can work off a laptop. But some days in the winter in New York, it's just cold as heck, and it actually is painful to get up, go to work, versus being able to work from home on certain days. So I hope that opens up.
Right. Brian, what are your thoughts in terms of what you see in the future in this field?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, I really think for a long time, disability inclusion has been seen as HR's responsibility. And I really want us to move to it being, this is everyone's responsibility. I'm in our marketing group. If Microsoft runs something that I think is offensive to people with disabilities, I'm not going to our HR officer. I'm going to our chief marketing officer and saying, why has this happened? Why didn't we have someone with a disability in the room giving their perspective? So I really want us to kind of adapt this 360 approach to accessibility and disability inclusion, where we're saying everyone who is a leader at this company needs to be on board with it. And I think the spotlight that disability has been given, for better or worse, during the pandemic will help us push to have more of these conversations where we're not just kind of giving it to HR and saying that's their issue to go deal with.
Terrific. Dan, what about you? What do you see in the future in terms of accommodations?
So it's always tough for me to predict, but I think at the very least we can say 2020 was really an exercise in this type of thing. With the sudden movement to fully remote workforces, to shut down of public services that people with or without disabilities rely on, public transportation, things like that. But it's interesting. One of my good friends works for a large company, and they all had desktops. Well, all their data was also on premise. Well, when we all moved remote, there was a significant hesitation by leadership to get people remote because they actually could not. So understanding how basic accommodations like remote work or flex work schedules, or even reasonable accommodations within the workplace, these are things we all became more accustomed to. Suddenly, everyone was a full-time caregiver in addition to being holding their full-time job. And I think being a caregiver is also something to talk about within the context of disability as well. But moving forward, I hope to see companies taking significant steps towards becoming more disability inclusive. Diversity and inclusion, for better or worse, is really on the forefront of everyone's mind right now for so many reasons. And if disability inclusion is not a part of that strategy, you need to rethink your overall diversity strategy. Because it needs to be a component of that. So that is the future, is more disability inclusiveness, more diversity and inclusiveness overall.
Fantastic. Lucy, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have a lot of hope, but I also think it's going to be a fight. I think that it's new normal, if that makes sense. And I think that the phrases that come to my mind are, I'm a big analogy person, are, rising tide lifts all ships and sharing is caring. So kind of those two analogies to say that just like curb cuts helps everybody, and initially people thought that curb cuts were, big imposement and why should we do that? That's how I feel about disability accommodations. So really trying to keep the pressure on, hey, let's make things better. We have a time to change. Let's make a good change. So it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be very uncomfortable, but it's going to be worth it. And so I would say, listening to people and trying to have an open mindset, in a sense that happy employees are more effective employees. And also with the disability thing, I think Becky said it, which was really great, changing the idea of disability. And I have to say, I've yet to meet a disabled person that isn't doesn't give 110% in terms of tenacity, in terms of stoicism, in terms of really having a lot of pride, with their job. And so it's there's so many great disabled people out there, people with disabilities. And, these accommodations will help everybody. So let's fight for more rather than trying to settle for less.
Fantastic. And Becky, let's have you bring us home on this.
I would say we are doing a lot of celebrating of new hires with disabilities, but we're not seeing enough promotion, retention, and advancement. So in order to do that, it would be important to see more senior executives share their story in relationship to disability as a person with a disability or as an ally. Get more people at a company involved with the disability employee resource groups. Sometimes they may not start as a person with a disability, they may start as an ally, but as they start to hear other stories being around them, they realize that they may have a disability themselves, and those stories come out, which become really beautiful. And we just want to see more people moving up within an organization rather than having to stay at the bottom level forever. And as Lucy said, we give our 110%. We're used to working 110 times harder than the person next to us. So we should get rewarded properly.
I think one of the things that industries have discovered over the past year is the old model and the old mindset of work productivity depends on workers being directly supervised over their shoulder by someone in authority. And, one of the reasons why we in the disability community have been told for decades, no, you can't work from home, is because they had this notion of people don't work hard unless somebody's standing over their shoulder watching them. And we proved this year that that is not true. There have been studies after studies that have demonstrated that in many cases, people who work from home are more productive than people who don't. So I wanted to sort of wrap up so that we could give Darlene a chance to have a look and see if there are particularly good questions in the chat that participants are posting that we can address at this point.
So far, there are no questions. So anyone, please feel free at this point. We'll maybe start with another question in the meantime, but please just drop any question you have.
I have another question, so we can go around again around the table and ask each one of you to provide to the audience one particular resource where they can find additional information on this topic. And we'll start with Dan this time.
Well, I don't want to shamelessly plug Getting Hired, but it's kind of where we spend a lot of our time. But if anybody wants to know more about how they can promote disability inclusion and from a holistic strategy, because I think it's not about focusing in one area only. You really do need to look at it, from a company-wide perspective. Like Brian, you mentioned, it's not just an HR problem. It's everyone's responsibility. But there are a lot of communities, there are a lot of websites, like Becky shared. There's tons of information. I mean, even just reading off of the Department of Labor site to get an idea for what the regulations are, and using that to sort of start a conversation. The metrics in there are utilization goals, which I think sometimes incents the wrong behavior from a compliance-driven approach. So don't want to get too stuck on some things there. But if you want to learn more, I'm happy to have a conversation. I know Becky and Disability In is an incredible resource as well. We've been to, I think, all of their big events. So that's all from me. But there's so much information out there to pick through to learn more about this stuff.
All right, Lucy, where do you want to send our participants for more information?
Yeah, I pasted a link in the chat about Brendan Kramer, our People with Disabilities leader. I think he's done a great job, and he has a lot of resource that he provides. I'm also going to plug my alma mater, UC Berkeley, go Bears. And I have to say the Ed Roberts campus was huge, huge benefit to me as a student, and did a similar thing like this. So I just want to say, huge props to organizations that prioritize this, because it is something that can really help a lot.
Fantastic. Becky.
So of course, thanks to Dan for already plugging Disability In, but I would recommend also for employers to take a look at the Job Accommodation Network, because you can check it out by disability and accommodations you may anticipate based on disabilities. And it's just a great resource. If something comes up, even once someone's hired, you can talk to them directly and get consult on how to do better. And even they're willing to audit your career page for accessibility and give recommendations for vendors that you could work with to make your websites more accessible for people who use screen readers.
I'm so glad you brought up that resource, Becky, because if no one else mentioned it, I was going to mention it. And I'll take this opportunity to do a personal plug. Back in the day, because I'm older, I was asked to provide some of the information for Job Accommodation Network related to accommodations for people with spina bifida. So very cool resource. Clint, what about you? Where are you going to send people for more info?
All right, I was just gonna. I'll copy the link in after I do my spiel, but I will say that go to I think it's WCAG, WCAG.org. That is the worldwide content accessibility guidelines. We are embracing that at Altice. That is where every company needs to be very familiar with, because an accessible online website is like creating an online curb cut. That is the analogy that I like to use. I've taken it from somebody else who's much smarter and better looking than me, and they used it and I loved it. but the online curb cut is exactly what every company should be focusing on. Check out WCAG, WCAG. I think they're up to either 2.2 or 2.3. Those are the versions. They continue to update and expand them. Use that as your guidelines to your IT department. And there are many companies that are very affordable that you can go to pay to put a widget on your site to make it accessible. So this doesn't have to be an enormous financial spend if you don't want it to be. So a company called accessiby.com, they have a really, really nice widget. There are many, many companies out there that do it. It's affordable. It's not going to make your CFO roll over and push it off to the fourth quarter or the third quarter and continue to not pay for it. So I will post those. Thank you, Becky. I appreciate that. And I'll put the Accessibility link in there as well. But that's what I have for that one.
Super, super. And what about you, Brian? Where would you send people for more info?
I would definitely send people to Disabilities in Next Gen initiative. This is the program that I got hired at Microsoft through. And basically what the program does is they bring in college students, they pay for everything, and they connect us with great companies that are committed to disability inclusion. So if you are looking to hire recent graduates with disabilities and you're like, I don't know where to begin, this is the resource that I would start in. And I would also just say, be aggressive in your hiring of people with disabilities. I think I talk to recruiters sometimes who are just like, oh, I'll look, I'm going to look and see if I see anyone with a disability applying. But it's like, you really have to go out and find this talent because it's in demand right now. And so connect with programs like Disability In and make sure that it's a priority and that you're budgeting for it too.
And the last thing that I'm going to say in this vein is for those of you, I would imagine that there's folks on here from everywhere. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to look up the person who does what I do at a university or college that's local to you and engage that person in conversation about workforce opportunities and about potential accommodations, because creatively coming up with accommodations for individuals is what people like me do all day long, every day, right? So another good resource is your local college or university disability services office. So how are we doing, Darlene? Do we have any questions in the chat?
We don't. So I don't know if you want to have a final question or if anybody wants to give a final thought.
Anybody want to throw out something that we didn't talk about today? All right.
I'll throw out a question.
Okay.
So if you can just talk about an example, because I don't think, maybe not, the idea of what an accommodation is scary, right? To some people, that it's going to be big, it's going to be expensive, it's going to cost time and money and effort. But maybe you can all just give an example of a common accommodation that employers can do for their employees.
Sure. Who wants to take a whack at that one first?
So, for example, I have step stools in areas of the office that I need. So, under my desk, a few step stools. I might have one at a printer. I definitely have one in the main restroom that I use, and I have one in the restroom in the cafeteria. Those were the two main areas that I needed it. Altice was wonderful with putting push button electric doors all over the place for me. That's probably more on the expensive side, although it helps everybody anyway. But step stools, there are so many cheap items that make somebody's day you kind of even keel with your other coworkers. Most accommodations, I think there's a number under $500. I mean, it's silly to even have to worry about this. It's silly. But we do. This is what we do. This is our job. So just knowing that most are under 500, is great.
You know, for me, the answer is something really, really simple. A place to park.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it just takes a bucket of blue paint, right, to paint an accessible parking space. And so if you go outside of wherever you're working and you notice that there aren't any, make sure that they appear. Dan, what about you?
I requested a standing desk at my office, and I was actually the first person at my company to do that. And now everybody has that option. They're about $200, but, and I'm serious when I say this, one of my biggest fears leaving the office, I was one of these people that said I could never do an office job. I just can't sit still for that long of a period. I'm perfectly capable of being very productive just in my own way. The standing desk helps me get my work done in the way that I can. And it's actually extremely important. So ever since I've had that, it's been great. And 3 of my colleagues actually decided to get a standing desk as well. And it also goes down to a normal level, so I can sit, it's just super, super versatile for me. So that's my example.
All right, Lucy, you're up.
Yeah, so big fan of step stools. I also have, like, right now it's a pillow, but the back adjuster. And I would just say, like, a comfortable employee wants to do more work, an uncomfortable employee will be distracted, regardless of, what it is. So just kind of keeping that in mind that, sometimes it seems like a lot of little things, like I have like the wrist thing, but like, and then I'm working for hours upon end because I'm comfortable and I'm focused on my job. I also have a grabber just because it's life. Grabbers are great. And so I would say grabbers, step stools, chair accommodation, and yeah, just this idea of like showing up and asking is means a lot to me. So when people say like, hey, what can I help you with? Like, I want this job too. I want I want to make the company money. I don't want to put you out of business. It always comes from how can I make this as affordable as possible while being as comfortable as possible.
Exactly, exactly. Becky, what are your thoughts on this?
I had an experience at one of my previous employers. We took up the whole 5th floor of a building in New York City, and they at first accommodated with the step stool at my desk and the kitchen and bathroom where I would be accessing. But then one day the head of administration woke up in the middle of the night and realized, what if I happen to be on the other side of the building and want to access the other 2 kitchens on the floor? So she immediately went out and got other step stools to make sure they were there as well. So that would kind of be going above and beyond versus just the immediate area where I can hang out. So I would say just that, and it's always very helpful. I have not actually asked for it on the job, but a lot of those like grabbers that you may use for laundry, it could be helpful for us reaching things. But then it's also training the staff to have the etiquette to offer to help someone if they need it, but don't do it without asking for permission to do it. So a lot of people assume that we can't do something, they see us struggling and they just want to do it for us. But start the dialogue and ask if there's something you can assist with, and we can let you know if we want to take you up on that offer.
Fantastic response. Brian, what about you?
I will say when I first started, I actually requested through Microsoft. So I have ADD, so they got me a coach that I met with like 10 times to kind of go through, like, as I was transitioning from college, how do I manage like the 100 emails that I get per day? How do I kind of split up my day and make it to all the meetings and keep track of everything? And that was huge for me. And I think that probably cost the company a few $1,000s. But if you think about it, I've been at Microsoft 4 years now. So just the investment that they made early on has definitely paid for itself many times over. I would also say a second thing that I think a lot of universities might forget to do, but I've learned at Microsoft, is we have all these shuttle drivers and shuttle vans, and Microsoft actually has done training for all of their contractors and vendors too. So the company that runs our cafeteria, all of their employees have done disability etiquette training. All of our shuttle drivers who, again, don't work directly through Microsoft, but contract with us, they've done disability training. So as a person with a visible disability, it makes me a lot more comfortable that I know I'm never going to have to explain to our security guard why I kind of look drunk right now, because they've probably done a training that can explain that.
Fantastic. I think we're at our time, Darlene, are we not?
Unfortunately, we are. I really just want to thank all of you panelists for the amazing information. We're getting such great feedback in the chat, thanking all of you and saying how helpful this was. So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and don't be surprised if we call on you again for this type or a different event, some other event, but now you'll be on our speed dial because you were all terrific. I want to thank Julie for being our wonderful moderator. Thank all of you who tuned in. You will be getting the recording, and I will also be sending links to all of the wonderful resources that were noted in the chat, because I opened every single one of them. So I'll send those along as well. So thank you, everybody, again. If you need any help with your recruiting, please don't hesitate to reach out